Hi, everybody. Welcome to the July 10th, 2015 edition of Colorado Inside Out. I'm your host, Dominic Dizzuti. Thank you very much for joining us. Let's get a quick take on the recall effort aimed at 3 members of the Jefferson County School Board. The 3 conservative members of the board are targets of the proposed recall and a rally event to collect signatures this week, some more than 2,000 supporters. Patty Calhoun from Westford, I guess we could say we may have seen this coming. It's not like this has been a bashful group on the school board, but 2,000 people at the rally event seemed significant. What do you think? Well,
and it's not like recalls haven't been popular in Colorado lately, so they didn't get this out of thin air. I think we can probably say so long to Julie Williams pretty soon. She seems to be the one who cannot master her Facebook account. You know, she and George Brockler have their social media problems. And she is certainly the one who has a tougher time arguing her position. The other 2, although conservative, are, I think, good, solid school board members, and I don't think they'll be recalled. But I do think this is going to go pretty far.
David Kopel from the Independence Institute and DU Law School. What do you think about what Patty said? Is it going to be separated out? I mean, A, we're assuming that the 15,000 signatures per person can happen. But if it does, do you think voters would be picky between the 3, or will it be a yes on 3 or no on 3?
Hopefully they'll distinguish, and as Patty said, I think Julie Williams is by far the least capable member of that group, and the one who's gotten the rest of the board in trouble with a lot of foolish, barely thought out ideas she has expressed inappropriately. An interesting thing about the petitions is that Colorado statutes 1-12-103 says that on a recall petition, the general statement may not contain any profane or false statements. Now, the petition's very good. There's no profanity in it. But it actually has very few, if any, true statements. It's mostly false. So, for example, it says that the new superintendent is getting paid $80,000 more than the old superintendent. Well, that's if you don't count the benefits the old one got, and you do count the benefits that the new one got. It likewise says 700 teachers left because of the new board majority. Well, that's really about the size of annual turnover they have anyway. Now, to the extent, if I don't know if annual turnover is 550 and 700 left, then maybe you'd say there was an excess of 150. I don't know the exact figures, but it's a lie to say that all 700 left because of the new board majority.
Penfield Tate, longtime state lawmaker and attorney with Greenberg Traurig. A few years back, when Republicans were using the whole recall effort, it was progressives rather saying, this is terrible, this is not what politics is about, and then what's good for the goose is good for the gander, and we're hearing it right back. What do you think the results will be from the recall effort?
Well, you know, I think it's a typical example of be careful what you wish for, what you use, it may be turned on you. David raises some very interesting and specific points, none of which I think matter at all. I think it's hard to tell, but I'm getting the sense that what's happening out there in JeffCo is such a level of discontent. I'm not convinced voters are going to distinguish. I'm not convinced voters are going to look at Julie Williams relative to Witt or the others. I think they're going to say, you know what, this whole thing is such a mess. We're so angry that it's time to do something. We voted them in. We're just taking them all out right now and trying to get to a different place and see if we can reset this board and the relationship and the operation of our schools and get a better result. So it'll be interesting to watch, but if I had to wager right now, I'd bet on all 3 of them being recalled.
Ed Seelever from the Denver Business Journal, wrap it up for us.
Well, I'm going to go the exact opposite way of Penn, and here is why. Back in 2014, I talked to the AFL-CIO a little bit about their campaign strategies in JeffCo specifically, which was a key swing county. And they said there was such anger that we were really bringing that up. The school board, hey, do you want more of the Republicans like the school board has given us? Well, Republicans had a great year in 2014 in the elections out there. I mean, people like Laura Woods, who's nowhere close to a moderate, got elected in in JeffCo. I wonder if this is another example of small but loud groups saying, let's get rid of them. I mean, and this is going to be a very small turnout election that we're going to see here because it's not planned for the 2016 general ballot. So I think it's going to be tough. I mean, recalls are, as Patty said, the hip thing to do in Colorado right now. I also question if this does work, is anyone in JeffCo going to be safe to serve out their entire term if they say controversial things?
True. Democratic state lawmaker Morgan Carroll announced her bid for Congress in the 6th Congressional District this week, taking on incumbent Republican Mike Coffman. Meanwhile, State Senator Lucia Guzman will replace Carroll as Democratic Senate Minority Leader when all that pairs out next week. Patty, I think this is an intriguing matchup. I mean, Morgan Carroll has not run on a statewide or congressional level, but she's a seasoned Colorado politician. She certainly creates a different situation for Mike Coffman, but Mike Coffman is no slouch. He has fought in some bitterly fought elections these last few years. What do you think?
Well, I think it would have been, Morgan Carroll might have wanted to run last time, just because every election, Coffman gets more and more comfortable in this new redistricted place. So he's now like Ed Perlmutter in the other party, but in the sense that it's pretty much his. Although Morgan Carroll, as we've seen in the legislature, is a good fighter. She is a good speaker. She certainly speaks her mind and talks up, and I think she'll be a good debater with him. She'll liven up the election a lot. Will she bring in the amount of money that's going to be necessary? Depends really on how hard the Democrats want this seat. We certainly are seeing around the country that they're saying this is going to be one of the big fights. I think now that she's stepped up as early as she has, it means we aren't going to really see any other Democrats jump in. It's going to be hers to win. Maybe more likely hers to lose. She's got an uphill battle, but it's going to be an interesting one. Glad she's staying in Colorado legislature, and I'm also really glad Lucia Guzman is a great senator, and she'll be a good minority leader.
David, what do you put the odds on for Morgan Carroll's chances? I mean, there may be a significant Democratic ticket with Hillary Clinton that may help or hinder Morgan Carroll, but she's going up against Mike Coffman, who, up there with Ed Perlmutter, is one of the more voracious campaigners out there in Colorado politics. What do you think?
Well, I think that the standard national political conventional wisdom is that this race is now a toss-up. She is a formidable candidate. Her political skills are not only the ones she's developed in her own life, but her political DNA is about as powerful as you can have in Colorado. In the 1940s show, we were talking about Denver District Attorney Carroll, that the Carroll family has been involved as usually winning candidates in Colorado politics, since the 1930s. So she's going to be very strong. And Mike Coffman also works very hard. So I think you can look at this nationally as a national A+ versus A+ marquee matchup of really excellent candidates on both sides. And I'd certainly agree with Patty that choosing Lucia Guzman as the Democratic minority leader was a great choice. She is certainly solidly, ardently on the left wing of her party, but also a person who really works well with Republicans. The Colorado Statesman did an article a few weeks ago about her good relationship and bipartisan work with Senator John Cook from Greeley, who's a very conservative guy, but they found ways they could work together on constructive, common sense solutions.
Penn, obviously, Morgan comes with a long list of successes on the state legislature level. But running for Congress is a whole different banana, especially CD6, which is going to get millions of dollars of national money put into it. How do you feel Morgan Carroll will fare?
Well, you're right. There'll be millions of dollars put in this race. And my initial take is that Morgan Carroll will fare far better than Andrew Romanoff did, simply because she lives in the district and she's from there. And I think that was Andrew's greatest shortcoming. And frankly, some of the prior races Andrew had picked had created some problems for him within what should have been a Democratic base. Morgan doesn't suffer from any of that. But I also think that Democrats in general are very foolish if they underestimate how hard Mike Coffman is willing to work. And I suspect he may be more popular in the district than people give him credit for. He's a smart guy. He's a good campaigner. He has sort of been on I think in the minds of some on the right fringe on a few issues, and how that gets woven into Morgan's campaign is going to be interesting and important. But that's sort of home base for her, and she wasn't districted into it. She's been there, and unlike even Mike. So I think it's going to be an interesting race. We'll have to see what Emily's List and some of the other national organizations that support women do. They'll probably dump a lot of money into this race, particularly in light of who may be the Democratic presidential nominee. So Morgan is going to be formidable, and she knows how to run a good ground game too. So it's going to be fascinating to watch.
Ed, was this the expected run? You're kind of our man on the scene at the Capitol. As you were watching this last legislative session go, is this kind of where everyone thought things were going to be happening?
Well, actually, the funny thing is, for years, a lot of people at the Capitol expected Morgan Carroll was going to run for the open AG seat, the open Attorney General seat in 2014, and were quite surprised when she passed on it and let Don Quick be the Democratic nominee. But Carroll obviously is someone who's risen up through her party. She's someone who's very ambitious. It's not a huge surprise to see that this is how it's coming around. I think one of the real factors in this race that nobody's talking about is going to be, who are the Republicans going to get to run for the race that Mike Kaufman passed on, the Senate race? If they can get a top-tier candidate, and mind you, their top candidate, Kaufman, is already out of that race, but I still argue that if they could get someone like a George Brockler to run for it and really put some heat on Bennett, that will probably make it harder for Carroll because more of the money will be flowing toward Michael Bennett and defending that seat. However, if they can't find a top-tier candidate, suddenly people can back away from that race. They can look at this one. They can put more money into it. And all of a sudden, it's a free-for-all. I agree with everyone. Mike Kaufman is going to be a tough candidate to beat. I think that the scare that he encountered in 2012 with Joe McCloskey, which nobody thought was going to be a race, caused him to get to know his district better in 2014. And I think he's a little more cemented, especially with his going out and going to bat for the Aurora VA. But for constructing the hospital. But it'll be interesting to see how all the chips fall and where this falls in line of who's going to contribute.
That's a good point. In a 4-3 vote, the Colorado Supreme Court rejected the Douglas County Schools vouchers program based on the Blaine Amendment, which bans the use of public funds for religious schools. Program supporters hope to get the case heard in the U.S. Supreme Court because similar Blaine amendments exist and affect 37 other states. David, you're one of our two esteemed attorneys at the table, so I'm going to hand it directly off to you. What does this decision mean? What does it mean for Douglas County?
It's a split decision of the 4 justices who voted to strike down the Douglas County program. 3 of them, as you said, voted on the basis of our Blaine Amendment, but that's only a plurality and it doesn't set precedent. The 4th vote was provided by Justice Marquez, our newest justice, in what I thought was a very powerful opinion, saying we don't even need to get to the Constitution because the structure of the program violates the Colorado School Finance Act. The other 6 justices said nobody has standing to challenge that, but she got to that issue. And I'm not an expert on that topic, but I think she made some powerful arguments. The plurality that relied on the Blaine Amendment had a much more difficult time because that amendment, which part of our original Constitution, which says you can't give government aid to religious institutions, including religious schools. The other argument is, well, we're not aiding religious schools. We're giving just people a scholarship, which they can take to a religious or non-religious school, whatever. And the Colorado Supreme Court had upheld a very similar program for college education. What we have, if you're a Colorado resident, you get a voucher that you can take to CU or Regis or whatever. And the plurality's attempt to distinguish that were very far-fetched and hard-working, and I feel sorry for whoever had to write that part of the unpersuasive opinion. Justice Ide, with 2 other justices, said that they should follow the original, the college analogy, and besides that, there is some question about whether the Blaine Amendment, which certainly had anti-Catholic animus as at least a very important motivation, is constitutional under the United States First Amendment's prohibitions on discrimination, even on neutral laws that are written in a neutral way, but which are written so as to target a particular religious group. The most recent case being one where the Santeria religion in Florida was targeted by a city statute for their animal sacrifice, even though the statute didn't say "we hate Santeria." You could certainly read that between the lines of what had happened.
Penn, what do you think? Like I said, you're one of our two esteemed lawyers at the table. Some supporters are talking about, say, this can be our case for the U.S. Supreme Court about Blaine amendments. Is that wishful thinking? Does it end here? Where are you at?
I wouldn't call it wishful in terms of fantasy, but it's hopeful thinking. I think a number of people believe that one of the core issues in this case is you've got the state Supreme Court ruling on the validity of a program based on Colorado constitutional provisions in Colorado law. And it is not that usual for the U.S. Supreme Court to take a case and interpret for itself how state laws or a state constitution should be read, applied, and interpreted. That's usually deferred to the state. So I think moving this into the federal court system is a bit of a reach. The other thing that I think makes this case a bit difficult for the proponents of the program is the way Douglas County structured their program. Although they may argue with a straight face that it wasn't an intent to support religious institutions, they really structured it so that the majority of the schools that are qualified to receive these vouchers are religiously based and affiliated, and almost all of the high schools that have been approved under their program have a religious base to them. And the schools were given the ability to discriminate among school applicants based on those faith-based principles. And I think a number of people at their core say this may not be anti-Catholic or anything else. The Constitution says what it says, and we don't want public funds to establish any religion, not just Catholicism or Protestant religion, but any religion. And so I think this is a tough case for Douglas County to get around, and I'm not convinced they have any recourse to the federal judiciary. I'm not convinced they'll take this case.
And what about the voucher argument here in Colorado? Does this decision stoke the fire? Does it dampen the fire? Where are you at?
Well, as someone who is neither a lawyer nor esteemed, I'll just say that there has been very little talk of vouchers for the 9 years I've been in the State House. I know this is something that was very big around the mid-2000s time, but when Republicans couldn't even get it through their own caucus at that point when they had control, I think enthusiasm really waned for it. You've seen a bill go through the last couple of years that is trying to give tax breaks to people who send their kids to private schools. Even that's not going anywhere. I don't know. I think with so much going on in the state, I don't know that there is going to be a cause celebre to take this up and make this a legislative rather than a judicial issue. I think they like the idea of doing it on a district-by-district basis, but I could be wrong. We'll see.
Patty, wrap it up for us.
Well, it's interesting that we kind of got sidetracked on the Blaine Amendment issue because there are other things not to like in this Douglas County voucher program. And Justice Marquez did point out another problem with it. So I think it'll be in a legal boondoggle for quite some time. And I think Ed's absolutely right. I think charters have kind of taken the fire away from vouchers. And that's certainly the direction a lot of public school districts are going in, setting up specialty schools.
The U.S. Supreme Court ruled this week that a lawsuit over Colorado's TABOR amendment will be sent back to the 10th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals. Opponents of TABOR have tried to overturn the law based on the argument that it takes away taxing authority from the state legislature. Again, Penn, we go to you on this legal issue. What does this mean? Is it a victory for the opponents? Is it a victory for the proponents? What is it?
It's a great decision because everyone's declaring victory and they're ready to go home. So it means victory for everyone. Now, this case is still pivoting around a very preliminary issue, and that is who has standing in the legal context. That is basically who has the lawful right to bring a case to challenge the validity or the applicability of TABOR. That's the only issue really on the table right now, who can correctly raise the issue. And opinions vary. There are many who believe that the way the court sent this back to the lower court in light of another decision sort of implies that if you look at the other Arizona decision, some will argue, well, standing was granted there only for specific things and particular reasons that don't line up in this case. And others say, well, that was a case where you're applying specific facts to the law, and we think in our case we can make a same or comparable argument and that it'll be found that we can challenge TABOR, then we can get to the merits of this. In the meantime, there are efforts in the background to start raising some issues among the electorate and perhaps put some things on the ballot that will resolve this issue or at least address it through an electoral process. This is going to be a long time before we have an answer to this. It is fascinating to watch because it's got a combination of substantive law, all of the procedural quirks you could hope for in a court case, and the drama of bouncing up and down through the federal judiciary, which moves much more slowly than the state courts do. So this will be around for a while and interesting reading and watching.
Ed, do you feel that opponents prefer the legal route of trying to work on TABOR rather than the electoral route?
Absolutely, and I mean, you can just tell that by the fact that, remember, there are a lot of people who are talking about fixing TABOR, but when they talk about fixing TABOR, they're talking about removing some of the restrictions that TABOR has placed on the use of state funds that come in. You know, the very specific formulas that have put some to education through Amendment 23 and contrasting with TABOR, and some of the other laws in there. Nobody in the legislature has come up with the proposal, hey, let's stop letting people vote on tax hikes. No, it's about as anti-populist a movement as you're going to find. I mean, and what's really surprising is that there are 3 legislators who are plaintiffs in this case, none of whom have ever introduced a bill to try to ask the voters to repeal the tax requirement vote-getting provisions of TABOR. So yeah, I mean, I think they see this as a legal route, and I think if this were to become a political issue, I don't think a lot of people are paying attention to the court system right now. If this were to become a political issue, I think it's got some backblow to it. This is not just a Republican versus Democrats issue. I mean, yes, Democrats may want to be able to bring in more money for some programs that they support more than Republicans, but I think if you go out to the general public and say, hey, do you want to be able to vote on whether to raise taxes? I'm pretty sure a large number is going to say yes. So I think this is going to have to be determined through the courts. I don't think it is a legislative issue.
Patty, what do you think? Is this just one more chapter in the long issue of fighting TABOR?
The endless fight against TABOR. It's so amazing to think in 1992 we voted for Amendment 2 and we voted for TABOR. And Amendment 2 got tossed pretty quickly by the Supreme Court. But here, 23 years later, we are still just beginning the legal arguments in the courts over TABOR. And we still are hearing there are going to be fixes proposed in the legislature, but we don't really see the will to push them through. We're going to have a couple ballot measures in November, including the marijuana tax ballot measure that'll come up, which will remind people what TABOR does. And I think Ed's exactly right that people like the idea of being able to vote on taxes. There still are some clunky parts of TABOR that need to be fixed, and someone in the legislature is going to have to take that on someday.
David, what's your quick take on the decision?
It's been the anti-TABOR lawsuit has been fatally wounded. David Skaggs is an outstanding lawyer who will try to prolong the death process as long as possible, but the end is inevitable. The Supreme Court vacated the decision of the 10th Circuit saying that a handful of legislators has standing to sue. And the Supreme Court in the Arizona redistricting case said the Arizona legislature has standing to sue because it was the Arizona legislature as a whole by an official act of the legislature, and they said, we vacate what you did in the 10th Circuit. Now, why don't you just think about it again, taking into account what we said about Arizona? That's a pretty clear signal, and if the case ever got to the merits, Justice Ginsburg issued a ringing endorsement of the people's right of initiative and referendum, and as part of democracy, and said even though the Constitution says the legislature has to do congressional redistricting, if the people want to take that away from the legislature and have an independent commission do it, they can, because all legislative power comes from the people. So that's the end of the merits of the case, should a court ever get to it.
Well, let's get to our very favorite part of the show, Disgrace of the Week. Patty, as always, start us off.
Well, just today, Catherine Archuleta resigned as head of the Office of Personnel Management, which is a sad end to a really good career as a public servant. She worked with Lamb, she worked with Pena, then she went to Washington after President Obama was elected. She is not responsible for 22 million people having their private information out there, but she recognizes that she's in charge, and so she left.
David.
RTD for not having buses to come back from on July 4th from Denver to Boulder for people who went to watch the fireworks at the Civic Center. That's their standard policy on July 4th. You go watch the fireworks at Folsom Field. They don't have any extra buses for that. Instead, they're running on the Saturday schedule of like one bus once an hour. The fireworks events are not some sudden surprise, and RTD is consistently contemptuous of people who want to take buses back from mass events, and that's why they really do show why it's important that everyone own a car, because you do have a reason to drive.
Penn.
Grandmother Brenda Little Spotted Horse for attending the fireworks display and just forgetting to take her granddaughter in the stroller home with her, but maybe it was because she figured she couldn't get on an RTD bus with the stroller, so it'd be easier just to leave her there and let somebody else deliver her.
Ed.
You know, Greece's Alexis Tsipras may yet pull out a last-minute deal to avert economic ruin in his country, but the lackadaisical way that he's gone about trying to fix this really shows that this country is in trouble far beyond whatever comes out of this weekend's talks.
Say something nice rather quickly. Patty.
Plan your transportation carefully next weekend because the Biennial of the Americas is back. They've got some great programs in Civic Center, much more accessible than previous biennials. Look at the schedule and you'll want to see a lot of it.
David.
Senators Bennett and Gardner for introducing bipartisan legislation to remove the federal prohibition on lawful use of banking services by marijuana businesses in states where it's legal.
Penn.
Just a shout out to our community and some of the great things that happen. I had the opportunity to visit the street taco event a couple of weeks ago. It was phenomenal.
Ed.
Keeping on the food theme, what Patrick O'Neill and Rob Hahn have done in setting up Avanti Food and Beverage, which I got to visit last night, is great. It's a great incubator for food entrepreneurs and a really great place where families can go to enjoy things. I hope we see more of these markets popping up across Denver.
And I'll add something to say something nice. I want to wish a quick happy birthday to my Uncle Richard. I promised if it landed on a Friday, I would do so. It's one of the quick perks I have as a host. So happy birthday, Uncle Richard. That is all the time we have tonight. Thanks for tuning in. Remember that you can catch any part of the show or CIO postgame online, and be sure to check out the CIO podcast on iTunes. Also, if you missed our latest trip in the time machine last week, go to our website and check out our trip to 1940. For everyone here at Channel 12, I'm Dominic Dezzutti. Thanks for watching. Good night.
Hi, I'm Larry, audio guru and time machine producer for Colorado Inside Out. Today I'm in my role as audio guy. I've just received the lineup for today's episode of Colorado Inside Out. And the first thing I'm going to do here is actually make sure all my microphones are working.
Besides, if you're into a bar, talk to problematic.
Got 5 microphones working here, and as you could probably hear in the background, we hear background chatter and all of those things. The next thing I'm going to do here, this mixer we have, digital console, actually has the ability to remember the different participants in our shows on there. So what I'm going to do now is go in and find here in the list all the people that will be participating in today's show. David Kopel, Patricia Calhoun, the queen of the show, the actual true star of the show, Dominic, the new and engaging host taking over from the popular Raj Chauhan. And now all those people's voices, the tunings that I've created for those individuals have been entered into the board, and I've got them to where they'll sound at their absolute best when the show starts. If you watch the shows here, you'll note that the microphones are typically on the side facing the host if someone's on a lapel. That's so when they turn to Dominic, There's a mic between them and Dominic. If they turned the other way, he'd be gone. If I put the mic over here and he's talking at Dominic, we don't really hear him. If I have the chance and someone's wearing a tie and I expect they're going to be turning to both ways in the audience, we'll try and place it on the tie. If you see that, somebody on the tie, it was because it was either really convenient and easy to hang it on their tie, or because we expected they'd be having to turn both ways to address different panelists. And so that ensures that we pick them up. The next step in the process is to go get a cup of coffee and talk to Dominic.
Hey, Simon, how are you? Well, it's good to see you. We're having our usual Friday cup of coffee, and it's always, as always, it's a kind of Larry and Dominic tradition, if you will. It's some of Columbia's finest, if you will, but it's what makes CIO what it is. It's something where everyone has to be on their toes. There's nothing there.
It's all about the beans, man.
It's always been about the beans. You ever want to know what the secret is behind Car Inside Out is? Good coffee.
I'd like to thank my agent and to all the members of the Academy for making this possible.